So if we look at our platform security function at Box, AI is embedded into all areas of that. And we have people who are experienced in AI security risks in particular that are looking specifically at AI threat models for our AI products, for our agents that we roll out on our platforms.
Welcome to Control Alt AI. I'm Dimitri Sirota on the show. I sit down with the leading voices of what's next in AI, data, and risk. We go beyond the buzz to unpack the real-world strategies shaping the future. Your shortcut to clarity in a world built on data and driven by intelligence.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Control Alt AI. I'm very grateful and excited to have as our guest Heather Ceylan, who is the CISO of Box and has a tremendous amount of experience building not only security organizations, but building security organizations in the era of AI. Hello, Heather.
Hi, good to see you.
So Heather, maybe just to get started, tell us a little bit about you, tell us a little bit about kind of how you got the Box, what your background is, and then we'll dig in a little bit about kind of some of your experiences with AI.
Sounds good. So as you said, my name is Heather Ceylan. I'm the CISO at Box. I recently joined about 6 months ago. Prior to joining Box, I came from 4 years at Zoom, building the security program there during what was quite a crazy period during the pandemic. So lots of good lessons learned from that. And then prior to that, I spent about 15 years in healthcare technology, consulting, cybersecurity, privacy at PwC and Collective Health. So.
Okay, amazing. Look, that must have been an incredible journey at Zoom. I think it changed all of us from doing, I remember pre-COVID, doing conference calls, post-COVID, doing video calls. Maybe to start, I'd love to just hear a little bit about that journey because the growth was astronomical and how many people onboarded. I'm guessing they probably didn't have anything very sophisticated. It sounds like you joined just around COVID. So maybe tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I joined right in the middle of the pandemic in January 2021. So things were a little bit crazy, but also good. We were building and scaling very quickly. We took what was a relatively small security team, but an appropriate security team for what the size of Zoom was at that time. And we scaled it to 400 people in 18 months. So we were also under an FTC order at the same time. So I actually joined the day we signed the FTC order. And so we were building security teams, we were building programs, building just baseline security controls. And at the time, I was leading the team that was responsible for all of our security certifications and attestations. So we had a lot of these really large customers and big banks that, wanted to bring on Zoom. And so we needed to have a wide set of security certifications to get them comfortable. And I think at that time we had a SOC 2 and an ISO 27001. And now I think in 1 year we had to get over 20 certifications. So it was a lot jam-packed into 1 year, but it was also such a wonderful learning experience on how to do things with speed and at scale.
Yeah, no, remarkable. Obviously, kind of a very unique experience, I think, in the industry. Right. So you're in Box now, and I'm guessing Box kind of looks at AI kind of several ways. Obviously, content is the business, provide secure content to employees, collaborators, et cetera. Lots of applications for AI. Many of them insecure. So maybe let's start there. I would love to just kind of hear your assessment about the risks around AI and some of kind of your approach and thinking around diminishing those risks, especially for a content business.
Yeah, it's a great point. So one of the great things about Box is companies are able to centralize their content onto a single platform. So when we look at one of the biggest risks with AI, and as you're deploying agents across your unstructured data and across your unstructured content, one of the challenges is that AI agents will go out and seek whatever information they need to do their job, right? Regardless of whether you think they should use that information or they should not. So it becomes the very fundamental basics of identity and permissions and privilege access management, like all of that it's always been important, but all of that becomes critically more important because now you have agents that are running loose and they don't have kind of the, they don't have the foresight of the humans being able to interact with that data, right? They're just going to grab whatever they can. So I think one unique thing about Box is companies have already put their content on Box. They've already have really strong permissions around that content. So it makes it a little bit easier and gives CISOs like me a little bit more assurance on when we bring those agents on that they are going to be permissions aware and they are only going to access the data that they need to access and that they have the ability to access.
Maybe we could double click on that a little bit. So, agent access is becoming a hot topic. I hear a lot about in security. We touch on it. A lot of other vendors are touching on it. There's vendors that specialize in and do nothing else. And there's a couple of challenges. One, as you say, is permissions. Secondly, maybe activity, just looking at kind of what they're doing, making sure they're not doing anything untoward or anomalous. But it all begins with being able to properly identify whether it's a non-human agent. What's your thinking there, whether it's in Box or just in kind of more broadly? Do you care more about whether they're kind of using, let's say, some type of Okta library to identify it, and you only care about something that's already kind of pre-authenticated or pre-proven to be an agent? Or are you looking for something more kind of broad where you're able, based on the behavior, to identify it as a non-human actor?
So I think it's a little bit of both, right? One thing I think is really important, we have to treat agents as their own identities, right? I don't think, they can inherit the permissions of the user, but they have to be their own identity. They need to have their own permissions and they have to be managed as an identity, just like we do human identities. But I think the second part you were touching on is the discoverability of agents, and you need a registry of agents. So like in an Okta or whatever identity platform you use, but you also have to be able to identify agents that are operating in your environment, inventory them, and have the right access controls, access restrictions around them.
Do you worry about ephemeral agents? Maybe team members, like it's so easy to build an agent now, right? You could do it in Claude, do it in so many different tooling. It's not always trivial to just inventory and create this kind of permanent index of all the approved agents. Your team members are building, just like they're building MCP servers, which I'm sure are kind of a nightmare for you. They're probably building agents as well and not telling you and not properly registering it in a catalog or something. So what do you do in those situations?
So that's where I think governance comes into play, right? My team is building agents and I want to encourage that, right? We want to encourage the experimentation. We want to encourage people to use agents to make them better, make them faster, make them more productive at their jobs. So we have to be able to enable that. But you also need to have proper governance around it. I kind of look at this as like the SaaS explosion of the early 2000s, right? Where employees were signing up for new SaaS applications. IT didn't have proper governance around it. So I think we're going to get there, and we have to start treating these agents as identities, as applications, and they have to start having that same rigor. But we also have to be able to provide a controlled process and environment for people to experiment with agents and find new ways to utilize them to make us better at our jobs.
And do you see that through some kind of sandboxing mechanism where there's a kind of a seconded or set aside environment where they could kind of provision, deploy, play around with without kind of touching production information? Or do you see some other mechanism for people to kind of learn on the job?
Yeah, I think definitely sandboxing is a good way to do that. It becomes a challenge, right? Because it's not like all agents are built on the same platform. So then you have to have, a sandbox for every platform that you're building in. But I definitely think that's a good option. I also think just having good baseline foundational controls and baseline policies that people have to build to and they have to align to, right? So getting those out, pushing those down to folks and making sure that they are aligning to those and adhering to those policies.
Do you see any of that being introduced by standards bodies like NIST in terms of the kind of controls that you need to be thinking through for agents, or is it premature? Are they just kind of thinking about it right now?
So I think NIST provides the AI risk management framework, which is a great framework for overall kind of like AI governance. They don't have anything specifically for agents. I always think it's good to align to those frameworks and pressure test ourselves against those frameworks. But ultimately, I think, governance has to come from within, right? The challenging thing about where we are with AI is companies, they have security teams, they have privacy teams, they have compliance teams. Companies are really just starting to get folks that are dedicated to AI governance. So all of this governing that we've been doing has been by committee, I would say, in most organizations. You have some people from security, some people from engineering, some people from IT, some people from privacy, legal, compliance. And when you have this governance by committee and you have all these different teams involved, it can make things really difficult and even slow us down. So I think one thing that's important is to just kind of recognize where we are in the industry with that. And, these governance bodies, they should make guiding decisions, right? And they should make guiding principles that the organization should follow. But I think where we really struggle is if those governance committees become operational in nature, right? Then it just slows us down too much. So we have to be able to set the right principles, and then we need dedicated AI governance professionals to be able to help enforce those and operationalize those.
Yeah, look, I remember from the early privacy days when people were preparing for GDPR, you had these kind of company-wide committees as well, where you had kind of legal professionals, you had security because they knew how to, where the systems were, unstructured systems in particular, you had data, but they weren't very efficient. But you also had this kind of interpretation problem. People were trying to kind of figure it out. Is that kind of where we are with AI, where you have these kind of disjointed committees with different levels of technical know-how and no real kind of standard in sight? And how do we kind of flip over to something where there's kind of some coherence around, hey, this is what we must do in governance. This is what we must do for securing agents. So these are like the 7 steps. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's exactly how I've been thinking about it. So it's funny that you said that, because as I think about where we are with AI governance today, I always think back to GDPR. And I was at PwC during that time helping companies, get ready for GDPR, and we were all trying to figure it out together and make different interpretations. And so I kind of see that as where we are right now with AI. There's the difference with where we are with AI is things are moving and changing so much more quickly, right? And so I think we'll always have some type of AI governance oversight that should be shared across all the teams we just mentioned, but you actually need dedicated AI governance professionals who don't sit in security and legal and compliance, but who actually sit with the engineering teams, with the product teams, who are applying that lens and who own that on a day-to-day basis versus just having this high-level oversight body.
And hate to do this to you, but I'm always curious, how are you defining AI or agentic governance, right? I think, going back to the privacy days, it was typically kind of associated with assessments, right? More of a legal top down, what's the purpose? What are you doing? And you kind of build out an understanding of potential risk through questionnaires, through interviews. And then there's kind of the security perspective, right? Where you're trying to be a lot more operational, trying to be a lot more exact. Where do you think AI governance fits and agentic governance? Is it a little bit of the kind of more legalistic approach, or is it completely that, or does it lean more towards the kind of more traditional security operational approach?
I think probably the more operational approach. I do think the high level approach is going to be important, because you have to have a set of guiding principles anytime you're adopting and using AI. So I think having, the legal, the compliance, security, privacy teams come together and figure out what are those guiding principles that we should live by as an organization to make sure our AI is safe, transparent, trustworthy. We should all align on those very strategically. But then when it comes to actually implementing those at the operational level, you need folks that are really technical and understand how these things work and all the ways that agents or AI could potentially be abused, especially by malicious actors, right? Because we always have to be 3 steps ahead of where our adversaries are.
And are there any industry bodies that you look to that you would recommend other CISOs or even CDOs think through, or should they go to PwC or Deloitte or an EY? Or they're like IAPP or Cloud Security Alliance or somebody else that you think is really formative in terms of kind of outlining the right approach?
Yeah, there's always the go-to ones like the Cloud Security Alliance. NIST CSF has guidelines. IAPP has the AI governance certification and framework out there. So those are ones that are good to look to from like an overall governance perspective. I think there's also a new one out there that's being worked on, AIUC, that is, more specific to the agent space. So I think we're going to start seeing more of these standards come out. So it's important that we continue to keep an eye on them, but we should use the standards to kind of pressure test ourselves and make sure we're doing everything right. At the end of the day, it all comes down to managing the risk for your organization, and you're going to have an acceptable risk tolerance of, hey, we need to move fast and we need to, bring AI to our platform quickly, but we need to do it in a secure manner, and you're going to know what's going to work best in your organization. So I always take a risk-based approach, but then I use the standards to make sure we're covering our bases and there's nothing we're missing.
I'm going to have to look up the AIUC. I'm not familiar with that one, so that framework. So that you stumped me there. Out of curiosity, I want to talk a little bit about kind of like the day-to-day operational kind of minutia of what you do in security and how AI is helping, right? Just the business security. Before we get there, I'm curious. So we talked a little about agentic as this kind of big unknown, right? Where are the agents? How are they interacting? What data do they have access or permissions, activity, all that kind of thing? Where does MCP fit in with that? Is that kind of a different problem? Because I'm guessing every PM you have right now is adding an MCP layer, and they're exposing some tooling, but more importantly, they're exposing some data resources that you may not know about and that are not registered anywhere and that may not be scanned. So tell me a little about your thinking on MCP and the proliferation of these new kind of interfaces to the world.
Yeah, so MCP it's actually very exciting, right? Like it allows us to bring these agents together to work across multiple systems. And I think it's a great move forward. But to your point, it's now another thing we have to control, we have to manage, we have to make sure it's being used securely. So to your point, a lot of the challenges we have are, we have as CISOs or developers are downloading MCPs, building their own MCP servers. How do you create a trusted registry of MCP servers so you're only pulling trusted ones into your environment? So that, and when I talk to a lot of my peers at other companies, this is always a very hot topic of conversation. And again, we'll get our arms around it and we're getting there. There's we've developed some tooling internally to detect that. There's new tools that are coming out that will give better control over MCP. But again, it's just going to take some time before they're tried and tested.
Yeah. It's a frontier area, but I know the VCs are very busy funding companies in that space. So I'm sure there'll be no dedicated.
There's no shortage of money flowing around in that space.
No, there's no shortage of money. Everything old again is new again, I guess, as the adage goes. Just throw in AI and agentic. Speaking of kind of everything old again is new again. Talk a little bit about how, you had 400 people. I don't know how big your prior employer at Zoom. I don't know how big your security team is at Box, but tell me a little bit about how AI and agentic is actually helping you kind of in the day-to-day, whether it's red teaming, whether it's just looking through like attestations around access permissions. How is AI helping the business of being a CISO for you?
So this is something I'm super excited about because I think, while AI presents a lot of new risk for us as CISOs, I mean, the major risk that it presents is it's allowing attackers to be faster, right? Like we don't have autonomous AI that's hacking us all the time, but what we do have is human attackers that are using AI to accelerate their reconnaissance, to accelerate their threat vectors. So what we have to do on our end, that means the time to exploit is decreasing for us, right? So we have to be better about all the fundamental things. Like for us as CISOs, I think it's about getting back to the basics, to the fundamentals, and how can AI help us be better at that? So on our security team, we're using AI in a lot of places, but we have 5 areas where we're making what we call our AI big bets for security. And some of those are around transformation of our SOC. I think AI agents can be really, really useful for our SOC teams they're always resource constrained. They have to correlate lots of data. They have to prioritize alerts, investigations, making sure we don't miss any alerts that are really important. So we're deploying agents to help us on those things. We're deploying agents to automate some of our like tier 1, tier 2 run books across our SOC. So then what that allows us to do is it allows our SOC analysts to focus on more proactive work. So rather than all the alert driven work that they're dealing with day to day and triaging ticket by ticket, they don't have to do that as much. And they're able to shift a large part of their work to actual threat hunting and looking for indicators of compromise in our environment. Another big bet we're making is around vulnerability remediation, right? I think this is one area where AI can really make us better at an area that's always been challenging for security teams. We have all these tools that are scanning for vulnerabilities in our source code, in our infrastructure, at all these different layers. And we create tickets for the engineering team to go fix. And we just create ticket after ticket after ticket. Some vulnerabilities are exploitable, some are not, some should be prioritized, some don't need to be prioritized. So AI to help us provide better context and better prioritization of those vulnerabilities that need to be fixed, but also AI to actually fix the vulnerabilities. So we have a series of different projects right now where we have that are coding the actual pull requests to remediate the vulnerabilities. So developers don't have to spend their time coding them. They just review the pull request, merge it, and they're done.
And out of curiosity, is that you're building like a homegrown just using one of the commercial kind of frontier models, or is that something, a platform that you purchased that does?
We have a couple of different things. So one piece of it is homegrown that we built as part of our hackathon. And another piece is we get through our SAST scanning tools.
Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. So that's two things. There's three more. And what are the other three? Yeah, what are the other three big bets?
The other three big bets, we are using AI for our security design reviews. So a lot of times this is engineers submitting architectural diagrams and design specs, design docs, and we have, our security assurance engineering team that is going through and manually reviewing these, looking for areas of risks in the architecture and the design. Well, we can now use an agent to take all of those design docs, design specs, architecture diagrams, run those against our security requirements that we have, and then spit out a list to us of here are the top issues, top risks that we should focus on. And again, there's always everything I'm talking about. We have humans in the loop on all of this, especially for in the SOC where they're performing high risk actions. We always have human in the loop, but these are things that allow us to get faster, to get better.
Okay. And the last two, I'm curious. These are the first three are fantastic. So I'm curious what the final two. It's like a countdown.
Another one is threat intelligence. So I think this is a huge area of opportunity for us because we are taking in threat intelligence from many, many, many different sources. We've got platforms that correlate the information, give us great dashboards, but what AI can help us do is it can help accelerate the output of those threat intelligence products. So right now, previously, our threat intelligence team has been building manual threat intelligence reports, one for that needs to go to the SOC, another one that needs to go to someone at my level who needs to see a summary on a weekly basis. But now you have AI that can pull all of that stuff together and create reports, curated reports for different audiences.
Okay, that's fantastic. I think great guidance. Frankly, I'm going to probably go call my security team and talk to them about the first four as well and make sure that they're working on them. How do you think about being able to report back to your leadership about the effectiveness of that program? Are you developing your own KPIs for each of these kind of four areas? Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about, showing output and outcomes that are improved because of the AI.
So talking more broadly first about how we kind of report on effectiveness of our security program, we take a multi-layered approach. So we take, at the highest level, most strategically, we use the NIST cybersecurity framework and we assess our maturity kind of at a program level, right? So we measure it that way. Then we have, our OKRs, which are our, quarterly things we're doing to improve the business, and how are we measuring our key results that we say we're going to drive. So a lot of our AI big bets that we're making are incorporated into our key results that we're measuring each quarter. And we also have key risk indicators, KRIs, and that's something we report on quarterly as well, where we have, here's our top risks, our top cyber risks for the company. And we have a series of metrics under each one that kind of show what is our exposure? Are we at an acceptable level of risk? And so all of those things kind of get reported. So all the AI big bets that we're making are kind of built into those. But on these specifically, we are developing metrics on, how can we show effectiveness and how can we prove that these AI investments that we're making as a team are actually having the benefits that we expect. And that's something that we definitely want to stay close to, because in security, resources are always constrained and you always want to make sure you're putting your resources to your areas of highest risk.
Yeah, and look, I see your CEO on TV a lot on CNBC. So he's obviously a huge exponent, advocate for AI. He's not going to probably push back a ton, but obviously some of the audience, they don't have that same fortune. Some of this reporting in terms of effectiveness, both kind of from a security in terms of risk reduction and then just operational efficiencies. Do you see one as being more important, or do you see them kind of both playing an equal role in being able to show value from this investment in AI?
I think you need to be thinking about both, and it's how do they come together, right? And how does it come together to tell the story of the trade-offs you're making? We may, for example, just a hypothetical example, you may say, hey, we are doing a lot of this. We are really making a big bet on AI agents in our SOC. They're going to be able to automate a lot of this work. So we won't have to hire tier one SOC analysts in the future. And so that is a trade-off that we're making. It's if we invest X dollars in 1 year of being able to build this capability, this is going to save us X number of dollars 3 years down the road. And I think where organizations have a lot of challenges, it's sometimes harder to look past that 1 year budget cycle and say, hey, we're going to make these investments this year, but it's not going to pay off for 2 or 3 years down the road. And I think that's where we've been very fortunate at Box is, we are able to be very future thinking and say like, look, we're going to invest a lot this year and we may not realize these investments for a couple of years to come. But with the executive support and sponsorship and buy-in we have, we're able to make a lot of those trade-offs.
Yeah. Okay. That's fantastic. Maybe one thing that also has kind of been on my mind a lot lately, and I'm kind of curious to get your take on it. So we talked a little bit about we started with talking just about kind of agents, right? And security around you have these kind of unattended agents accessing your data, interacting with your systems and your infrastructure. And then we kind of moved back to like, well, you're going to be adopting agents, AI, but more likely agents or some form, whether they're multitasking or just single task. Now, tools that you buy and things that you build, they all kind of do AI a little bit differently, right? Some are based on small language models that are kind of proprietary and closed. Some are based or just pass through to a commercial model. I mentioned Claude earlier, but maybe it's OpenAI, maybe it's a Mistral or something else. And some is, themselves have kind of a human in the middle, right? There's maybe a mechanical Turk thing. How do you deal with all those permutations, right? You now have agents you're building, the governance is still a work in progress. It's not always clear how those agents are actually interacting, not only with your own data and infrastructure, but also just in terms of what is the AI under the hood, right? How do you think about that? It feels like there's almost this kind of infinite loop of possibilities and it becomes too much.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to keep growing, right? It's not going to get smaller. And so I think the way we approach it at Box, and I think one of the good things for us is we have our strategic partners, right? You have your model providers that you work with. It's important for us to be a model agnostic platform, right? So we support multiple models, but it's important to have those strong partnerships, those strong relationships, and to make sure you're only using trusted models, right? And if we remember back to like 2 years ago when OpenAI ChatGPT was released, as security professionals, everyone in the industry was trying to get comfortable with using this and incorporating it into their product. And there were relatively little security assurances you could get from OpenAI at the time. And then they realized, if they wanted to scale, do business with enterprises, they had to invest a lot, and they have invested a lot and they've caught up, right? So, OpenAI, Anthropic, all these companies that are building enterprise grade solutions, we have to allow them to build the enterprise grade solutions. We have to make sure we're only working with model providers that have the security controls that we require in our environment. And again, it comes back to governance. You have to have good governance over those, while still allowing your engineering teams to explore and experiment with new models. So we have fast track processes if, for POC type vendors, right? Where we just want to do a proof of concept with a new model provider. We have certain processes we put in place, certain safeguards we put in place, but we allow our engineering teams to fast track those processes a little bit and before we go through our whole governance review. So it's going to keep moving fast and we're going to have to continue to keep playing catch up, but we're going to get there. We got our arms around the SaaS sprawl.
Final question for you, just in terms of kind of organizationally, how you think a little bit about kind of AI. We talked about some of the things that are still missing, and obviously we're still very early days. Will there be a separate AI security function within every security organization, or do you just see that being subsumed within the more traditional kind of cyber threats and red teaming and other kind of orgs?
That's a great question. And I'm actually, I'm talking to a lot of CISOs in this space. I'm seeing some actually start to build dedicated AI security functions. And I think that's a model that could definitely work. I also think there's a model that works, and we recognize that AI is embedded into all of the security functions we perform, right? So if we look at our platform security function at Box, AI is embedded into all areas of that. And we have people who are experienced in AI security risks in particular that are looking specifically at AI threat models for our AI products, for our agents that we roll out on our platforms. So for us, the model that we're going with is more of an embedded model. But that's not to say that like a dedicated AI security function couldn't work. I think there's many scenarios in which that may be a better solution.
Like all things AI, the jury is still out.
Exactly.
It hasn't yet. Heather, this was fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on. I think you've been a wealth of information and an incredible background, and obviously where you are now and kind of what you did prior. So thank you very much for joining us so soon after Thanksgiving.
Thanks for having me. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Control Alt AI. If you like today's conversation, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And for more insights on AI, data, and risk, visit bigid.ai. See you next time.